To the distinguished members of the Pan-African Agenda, welcome. What we're doing today is breaking down the core confession of an American insider, and it's a story that serves as a powerful cautionary tale for any nation that's trying to chart its own course toward true economic sovereignty. We're about to pull back the curtain on a system he says was built to create a modern global empire. All right, let's just dive right in with the author's own words. This is John Perkins's pretty shocking definition of the job he claims he had. It's a powerful statement, and it really sets the stage for this entire system we're going to unpack. A system he calls a new, more terrifying version of a very, very old game. So what in the world is an economic hitman? Well, according to the book, these are people who use huge financial organizations to basically trap other countries into a state of dependence. And the key to their whole goal is that word right there, corporatocracy. See, Perkins argues that EHMs don't really work for a single government in the way we usually think. They work for this powerful alliance of giant corporations, big banks, and governments, all working together. The goal? To build an empire, not with soldiers and tanks, but with spreadsheets and debt. But how does this actually play out in the real world? It's not just random. Perkins lays out a very specific, step-by-step process. This is the playbook he says was used time and time again to lock nations into a cycle of debt that they could never escape. And here's that playbook, all mapped out. It all starts with a lie, these wildly optimistic, even fraudulent economic forecasts. Next, in come the giant loans from places like the World Bank. But here's the real trick in step 3. That loan money comes with a massive catch. American companies have to get the contracts to build everything. So most of that money never even touches the country it's supposed to be helping. It just goes from a bank in Washington, D.C. to a construction company in Texas. And the result? The target country is now stuck with a crushing debt it can't possibly repay, which gives the lenders all the political power. Okay, so what if a country's leader is smart enough to see this coming? What if they just say, no thank you? Well, according to Perkins, the system doesn't just pack up and go home. Oh no, it escalates. And it escalates through a very clear and what he calls a ruthless hierarchy of force. The EHMs are always the first wave. They're the preferred method because it's clean, it's quiet, and it all happens under the guise of legitimate economics. It's conquest with a checkbook. But if that doesn't work, well, then things take a much darker turn. This second wave is deployed. Perkins calls them the jackals. He claims these are covert operatives sent in to overthrow or even assassinate leaders who refuse to be bought or bullied into submission. He actually points to leaders like Jaime Roldos of Ecuador and Omar Torrijos of Panama as examples where, he alleges, the jackals stepped in after the EHMs failed. And this brings us to the final play in the book. When the financial tricks don't work and the covert ops fail, the third wave is just plain old military force. This is when the masks come off completely. Perkins uses the invasion of Iraq as a prime example of what happens when a leader repeatedly defies the agenda of this corporatocracy. Now, this all might sound a bit like a spy novel, so let's bring it down to earth with a real-world case study. Perkins uses Ecuador, a nation incredibly rich in oil, to show just how devastating the consequences of this playbook can be. Just look at these numbers. This, Perkins argues, is the direct results of the EHM strategy. In just a couple of decades, Ecuador's national debt went from a pretty manageable $240 million to a jaw-dropping $16 billion. That's not just an increase, that's an explosion of debt. So, with all this so-called development and this huge oil boom, you'd think life must have gotten better for the average person in Ecuador, right? Well, according to the data Perkins presents, the answer is a hard no. During that exact same period, the national poverty level actually skyrocketed from 50% all the way up to 70%. So where did all the money go? This chart tells the story. For every $100 of oil revenue, a massive $75 went straight into the pockets of foreign oil companies. Another $22.50 went to paying off that giant foreign debt. You know what that left for the actual people of Ecuador? $2.50. That's it. For their hospitals, their schools, and to help the very people whose lands were being destroyed. This all leads to the big question. What's the point of all this? What's the endgame? Perkins is clear. He says it's all about creating and maintaining a new type of global empire, one run by what he calls the corporatocracy. Now, he's really specific about this. He doesn't describe some shadowy group meeting at a secret room. He defines the corporatocracy as more of a fraternity. It's an alliance of powerful people from big business, banking, and government who all share the same fundamental belief that the world's resources are there for them to control and that global consumption must always, always expand. And these are the three pillars, he says, hold the whole thing up. You've got the giant corporations who get rich off the contracts, the international banks that provide the loans to make it all happen, and the government that provides the political cover and, if needed, the military muscle. According to Perkins, it's a symbiotic relationship. Each part makes the other two stronger, all in the service of expanding this global empire. But here's the interesting thing. Perkins doesn't end his confession with a feeling of complete despair. He frames it as a story, a dominant story about how the world works, a story that he helped to write. And his final point is a powerful one. Once you become aware of the story, you gain the power to change it. So in the end, this confession is a warning. And it leaves us, and especially leaders across the African continent and beyond, with a critical, provocative question. Knowing that this playbook for economic capture exists, how can nations forge their own path? How can they achieve true economic sovereignty and make absolutely sure that their own resources benefit their own people? That is the challenge this confession puts before all of us.